Hi, I'm Tommy, and welcome back to Through the Lens. Today we're going to be talking about the Kine Exakta, the first commercially successful single-lens reflex camera. Let's get into it. So the Kine Exakta was produced from 1936 to 1949 by Ihagi Kamerawerk out of Dresden, Germany, and as I mentioned before, it was the first commercially successful single-lens reflex or SLR camera. Single-lens reflex means when you look through the viewfinder, you're actually seeing out of the lens, which was a huge leap forward back in the 30s. Now, this was the first commercially successful model. There were some SLR cameras that were invented prior to this one, but they weren't the most ergonomic thing in the world. They were very clunky, and they weren't for your average photographer, so they never caught on commercially. But this is the first mass-produced, successful single-lens reflex camera. It was very prevalent during World War II with German photojournalists, and it's got some interesting history behind it. But first, I'll bring you in a little bit closer, and I'll show you how to operate it. So now that you're a little bit closer, I will show you how to use this camera. Let's start off with the front of the camera. Right on the front right here is the shutter release button. It's a bit strange to have it on the front of this camera like that, but all of the Exaktas are designed that way, and you do get used to it. So moving on to the lens, the aperture settings go down to f/16 and up to f2.8. And there's no clicks, so you can set it in between apertures if you so desire. And you will also notice that instead of being measured in feet, the focal distance is measured in meters. Again, German camera. I didn't notice that until it was a little bit too late, but it's okay. This is an SLR camera, so all you have to do is look through the viewfinder and focus it that way. Speaking of the viewfinder, to open up your viewfinder, you press this little button right here, and it is the most satisfying thing in the world. Ah, that's so fun to do. Now, there's a few safety features relating to the viewfinder. Let me close it right back up. If the viewfinder is closed, you can't take a picture. Exakta doesn't want you wasting your film, so if I open that up and advance the camera, it'll fire. Let me just advance the camera again and show you that it really doesn't. See, it really doesn't operate until it's open. I don't know if this is a safety feature or if because the camera is a bit primitive, but you actually can't look through the viewfinder until the film has been advanced. You can see there that it's a bit blurry and you can't really see anything until I work the advance lever right here. See, it's a bit dark, but yeah, you can see my fingers. So that's another safety feature of this camera. This right here is a magnifying glass. So if you are unsure if you're actually focused dead on and you want to be extra sure, you pop down the magnifying glass and it'll magnify your ground glass for precise focusing. I found that the magnifying glass is pretty much next to useless because I've only shot film with this camera outside. And when I'm outside, the sun glares on the magnifying glass really bad, and I can never see a thing. Sometimes I can barely see a thing on the ground glass. Then I'll just look through this little hole right here, and that will be my viewfinder. To bring the magnifying glass back up, there's a little knob right here, and just pull that over and it'll pop right back up. To set the shutter speed on this camera, this is a system that was kept throughout most of the Exakta models, most if not all. There is a small dot in the middle and other dots around the outside with the different speed settings, and you just pull up and rotate it to the speed that you would like to set it to. Let's set it to 1000 and drop it back down, and that's how you select your speed. Around the advance lever is the frame counter. The frame counter on mine doesn't work. I don't know why, it just doesn't work. So I just shoot with this camera until it's a little bit too hard to advance the film anymore. Right behind the advance lever, there is the direction selector, I will call it, but it's in German. So V is for Vorwärts or forward, and R is for rückwärts, or backward. So if you have it set to V for vorwärts, that's how you set it when you want to take pictures with this camera like normal. Then once you want to rewind your film back into its cassette, you switch it to rückwärts and just crank it away. Now, to open this camera, there is just a little button right here that you pull down on, and the back pops right off. That's common with these older camera models, and this is what the inside looks like. You can see the serial number is printed right there. Now you would load your 35mm film cassette into the right side like any normal camera and switch it and stretch the film over to the left and put it in the take-up spool. But unlike any normal camera, this take-up spool is removable. I'm not going to remove it because it's a bit of a pain to get it back in there, but trust me, you can take it out. Now the reason, oh boy, see? It's a pain to put back in. Now the reason you would take that out is back in the 30s, I've never wanted to do this, but apparently people did in Germany. You would want to load another empty 35mm film cassette into this side and stretch your film and load it into another film cassette. And let's say you wanted to open your camera so you can develop the shots that you've already taken while keeping the rest of your film. If you wanted to do that, you just unscrew this little knob right here, pull down, and this little blade will slice off your film. This feature was kept in all of the Exakta cameras that I have well into the 60s, so I don't much know why that would need to continue to be a thing in the 60s, but I guess it was. Now let me put this back on. You're going to want to make sure that your rewind knob, let's call it, is pressed up because there's no spring tension on it or anything like that, so you're just going to want to pull it back up and your back will pop right back on. Oh, you can see I didn't do it right, but you get the picture. Now, the only thing I've left to talk about is this knob right here. I know that it's a self-timer, but for the life of me, I can't figure out how to use it. You can rotate this just like the speed selector and put it on the different number settings. I don't know what they mean, but whenever I try to look up the manual for this camera, it's in German, and I don't know nearly enough German to understand an entire manual, but this is a self-timer. I don't know how it works. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. And that is pretty much it, how you operate this camera. I never use the self-timer anyway, so it's not something that I'm going to worry about. Now I'll get into the history of the camera and a few of the variations throughout its production. There are 4 different versions of this camera, 3 of which were produced before the war and 1 of which after. This is version 3, so this was the last pre-war version. This was produced between 1938 and 1940. There was a 5-year gap from 1940 to 1945 where these cameras were not produced. Now that is because the Exakta factory was tooled for the war effort during those years, and toward the end of 1945 it was destroyed in an Allied bombing raid. So until the factory was rebuilt, they didn't produce these cameras. Now, there's only a few cosmetic differences throughout the different versions. The most glaring one is that in version 1, instead of having this rectangular magnifying glass, the magnifying glass is actually round. That model is rarer and more expensive, so if you're a collector, that's what you want to look out for. There's also a few trivial little differences, like Exakta being spelled with a C instead of a K on some of the models sent to other countries, and this 3rd hole above the flash sync port. But the functionality of the camera is pretty much identical. Earlier I mentioned that this was a popular camera with German photojournalists, and there's a story about a man named Joe Haydecker who was conscripted into the German army into a propaganda unit despite being an anti-Nazi. So when he was stationed in Warsaw, Poland, he snuck around with one of these cameras and took some illegal pictures of the Warsaw ghetto and hid the negatives from the Gestapo until it was safe to be released to the public. Also, these cameras were apparently prized by US submarine captains because you could take pictures through the periscope with one of these very easily. There also might be a version of the Kine Exakta produced for the Kriegsmarine, or the German Navy, that has a small German eagle engraved into the top left side of the top plate of the camera. This camera was the peak of German engineering back in the late 30s. This was up on the same level as Leica, but right now it's nowhere near the price. You can pick this up for a few $100s, where Leicas go for a few $1,000s, but if you're very, very lucky, you might be able to find one of these at an estate sale or at a garage sale if you look in the right place. I seem to have a trend going on with the series. I've only got 2 episodes out, but they're both focused on World War II era cameras. And if you would like to see any more episodes focused on World War II cameras, I have no shortage of World War II era cameras. So leave a comment below if you would like to see that, or if you have a different suggestion for a video that you would like to see, leave that in the comments, and if I have the camera you suggest, then I'll pull it out and talk about it. Thank you so much. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.